Hello and welcome back to Tom's Datsun Garage. In my previous video, I had mentioned that I was going to be putting the doors back together in my next video, which should have been this video. Unfortunately, I was running across a lot of little pieces that I had to order because I was missing some parts and pieces, and one of the parts that I ordered didn't want to fit, so there's that. But I've got other parts on order, and I got some pieces from the parts card that'll work no problem, and I just have to have a couple of parts replated in the correct plating and wait for the other parts to arrive, basically. So I will be getting back on the doors in the near future. We'll put it that way. I really thought I'd be further along than I am, but some happy news. My front crossmember had shown up, and I am going to continue and finish that story for you all right now. And it's going to start with what happened right after the last video I made, where I was showing you the differences between the original crossmember and the two crossmembers I had been sent by Techno Toy Tuning. After that video, I took tape and a marker and a paint pen, and I went over it and I marked everything that I could see that would help them with fixing the problem of fitment. I made notes. I also spent my own money to mail both of them back, all marked up with the notes on it and everything, to California from South Florida. It wasn't exactly inexpensive, but I wanted to make sure they had everything they needed to correct the problem. When I had spoken to the gentleman on the phone, I won't mention his name in this video, but when I spoke with him, he said that he had received the parts. I saw that it had shown up at the warehouse. I got an email saying that they had been delivered. I reached out by phone. He had gotten the parts, and he was going to get into the box and go over it and find out what needs to be done. I also gave him emails with direct and very exact information on everything. There was basically no question on what needed to be done. I couldn't have done any more other than fly to California with the parts in my hands and physically help them make it work. I did everything I could. And then was radio silence. And I had a feeling that this was going to be ugly on their end, because it was not something that I thought was going to be an easy fix. This had to have been something wrong with their jig or something like that. That's what I was thinking. So when I spoke to him the second time, he had informed me that they had pulled other ones off the shelf, other cross members off the shelf, and they wouldn't fit back in the jig. And apparently what they determined was happening was all the parts are being clamped together in the jig for welding. During the welding process, the parts are moving, and once they're out of the jig, they're moving enough to where they won't go back in the jig. So they were going to re-engineer the jig. Well, that's kind of what I was thinking. I knew this wasn't going to be simple or easy. So a month goes by, and I hadn't heard anything, and I wasn't expecting to. So I reached back out just out of curiosity. The second time, he had mentioned that they were waiting on laser cut pieces of metal to show up so that they can get it built. Okay, cool. Another month goes by. I reach out again. And this the third time I reached out, he says, "Oh yeah, it's on the way." So by this point, it's been 4 months in between, somewhere around there, since I had sent the parts back to where the new one is coming back. So about 4 months-ish, maybe a little longer. And I said, okay, well, do you have a tracking number or anything like that? He says, yes. I'll send it to you in your email. I said, cool. I said, you still have my email address and all that? And he said, yeah. Okay, cool. Cool. I'm finally getting a part. And then he said, when you get it in the box, we've included new steering rack bushings. Use those bushings. Okay, no problem. So about a week after that, the part shows up. I open the box. I see the new Crossmember. It looks no different. All right, color's the same and all that. I open the box with the new bushings, and the bushings are different. They're thinner. And I'll show you that in a little bit in great detail. So what you're going to see in this video is what I believe their fix was versus actually re-engineering the jig or actually fixing the problem that underlies with the fitment of the front crossmember from Techno Toy Tuning. Am I mad or upset? I'll just say I'm disappointed, but in the end, it still wind up working. But this video is going to show you all that, and I'm going to go through it in great detail. So hang on, sit tight, and then judge for yourself if you think that product is worth the money. I'll leave that for you to decide after watching everything I go through. So with that, let's get started. So with all of that in mind, and everything they have told me, you would think this piece would have come in ready to drop in and be absolutely perfect. Well, sort of. So this is the driver's side. You remember the last time I could drop one in on one side, not the other. Here's the passenger side. No problem. Drops right in. Come over to the driver's side. Nope. Still have to force that in. But that wasn't the biggest problem. Obviously the rack wouldn't even mount to it, so that was the biggest problem. They also told me that they had to cut these pieces or have new laser cut pieces of metal, and they were waiting on them to show up. So I thought, okay, this would be different also. Remember, I had to really force my control arms in between here and really bend these out a little bit to get these to be wider so that I could get my control arms to fit in there no problem. And doing the initial measurement with my original one, they look to be about the same. So I expect the control arms to go in a little easier on this one. But the real test, the true test, is of course the steering rack. So let's observe that right now. All right, here on purpose, let's take the rack with the original supplied bushings. Drops right on, no problem. Nice and even, sits right into place. Okay, third and final cross member. Original supplied bushings. Same exact problem. Same exact problem. Absolutely no different. Pushed in on one side, it pops out of the other. You can see that there's just no way. Now, let me show you what they sent me and what they told me explicitly to use when I put this together. And here we are. These are the original supplied bushings, and these are the new ones they sent with the crossmember with the explicit instructions to use these ones. They are marked upper and lower, and they're two-piece. So pretty big difference between that and the originals. The originals have a little bit of flex and give to them, and they were made by Energy Suspension, which is a very popular company
they make a lot of good high quality products. Well, these also came from Energy Suspension. However, I believe these did not exist until my problem, and this is my speculation. I believe what they did was, instead of re-engineering all their racks that they have, or their cross members out there, what they did was they had Energy Suspension manufacture custom bushings to make this work. They're marked upper and lower, they're two-piece, they're thinner, they're slightly harder than the ones that were originally supplied. So I am of the mind that these are completely custom. And I know they work because I've actually mounted the rack to that cross member up here on the bench to make sure I could even do it. You still have to wrestle it, but it is possible to mount it. It will work. So I don't know if this is going to be their solution going forward, because they have so many of those cross members out there already, with potentially other people having the same problem. I'm not sure, but I can tell you, based on what you out there and what I just saw, doesn't look like they re-engineered it like they originally told me they were going to. Or if they did, it still didn't turn out right. One of the two. We'll never know for sure. But I'm going to mount the rack on the cross member on the bench before I put the cross member in the car, because it's a lot easier to get these to line up and wrestle them in place and get these screws started before I run it home. And here we are with their new bushings sitting on the perches, and you can see it's still not right, but these do allow these to be bolted into place. And I still have to kind of maneuver these around and bend them around a little bit to get the screws to start, but they do work. Is this right? What do you think? Especially after the conversation that we had on the phone. I don't know. You decide. You decide if it's worth the money they ask for. Now I'm going to get these screws started, and what I'm going to do is apply, because these are stainless, I'm going to apply a anti-seize to the threads and then get them started into these aluminum caps through the bottom. And once I get this rack in place on here, then I'm going to put this back up into the car, get the lower control arms bolted back up, and then we'll finally get to do the tie rod ends and the sway bar like I meant to in the original video. There you go. You got kind of a good look down in here and see how they line up. It's a bit of a wrestle fest. So I'm going to wrestle these around to get the bolts started again. And a little bit of anti-seize on the threads, because these are stainless steel going into aluminum caps. So I'm going to put you guys on a stand and you guys can watch me wrestle that together. And there you have it, fully mounted. Everything's in place with their supplied bushings. And although I had to wrestle it around to get all the bolts to start, it does fit and it does go together. And it's all nice and tight. I really recommend you mounting the rack to the cross member before putting it in the car, because wrestling this upside down would be really rough. I tried doing that the first time I was trying to put this on, in my video where I was installing it the first time. You can see that it took me quite a bit of wrestling and still got nowhere, obviously. But now I'm gonna get this mounted in the car, and I will be letting you know shortly about the fitment of the lower control arms in here. That is going to be the final test of this third crossmember. And it looks like I'm still going to have to spread these apart to get the lower control arms to go back in there. So it doesn't look like I'm going to have to stretch it as much as I did the first two, but for this one, I'm still having to do it. So does that mean this whole cross member is a brand new one made from scratch in their new jig like they said it was going to be? I don't know. You tell me. The fitment doesn't look that much different. A couple of adjustable wrenches and some careful placement of the jaws and pushing those two handles apart some yielded the results I needed. So now this has been opened up enough to where the lower control arms should go right up in there like they do on the factory original crossmember. Because the rack is mounted to the crossmember, I now have to be cognizant of the rack and inner tie rod end getting in the way of the through bolt for the lower control arms. So make sure your hardware fits through here nicely, because the buildup of powder coating could potentially give you a pretty hard time of getting your hardware through there smoothly. So make sure it goes through there smoothly before you mount your rack to the car and the crossmember. And then I will take the rack and move it back the other way, and I have the tie rod ends in the full up position so that I have maximum clearance to get to the lower control arm mounting bolts. So learn from me, save yourself some time and aggravation. Okay, so now we're finally at the point that I wanted to be at months and months ago, with the steering rack installed on the crossmember. So now it is finally time for me to go over how to finish the front suspension by showing you how to install and set up your outer tie rod ends, as well as install the front sway bar kit. So let's get started. So here's the setup you're going to have if you've ordered this style of tie rod end set from Techno Toy Tuning. You're going to have the aluminum sleeves, which are anodized, and then you're going to have your outer tie rod end pieces. Make sure you put the lock nuts on the inner and outer tie rod ends before this point, because you really don't want to have to take it back apart again. That would be a terrible oversight. You can use anti-seize on the threads because it's dissimilar metals. This is the aluminum and this is steel. So ideally, you don't want those two pieces to have any kind of corrosion in between them, and anti-seize is a good thing for that. But me personally, I've had really good luck also using just regular old wheel bearing grease. This is just high temp wheel bearing grease. I'm actually going to use that on the threads, on the inner and the outer tie rod end threads. And I'm not going to use grease on this part, but this is the piece that squeezes your outer tie rod end to the steering knuckle. And it's actually going to go in just like you see this. It's like upside down. So I'm going to go ahead and get this greased up. We're going to go over to the car and I'll show you the exact order of installation. Okay, everything's greased up. Now let's go over to the car. And the first thing is to make sure that your rack is centered. So you're going to turn it all the way clockwise or all the way counterclockwise, either direction, until it stops turning.
You're going to take note of where your pinion, your input here, is, and you're going to wind it back the other direction. So in other words, if you go all the way far left, mark it, and then count the rotations until it stops turning all the way to the far right. You're going to take that and go back exactly half of that. So let's say it takes 3 turns. You're going to go back a turn and a half. That's basically how you find center on your steering rack. That method's worked very well for me over the years. Other people might have other methods, but it served me pretty well. It's gotten me certainly close enough to do what I need to do with no problems. All right, now we got that sorted. As you can see, I've got a light layer of grease on the threads, just wheel bearing grease, and I have my sleeves here. So these are basically going to turn the tie rod ends into basically like a turnbuckle. So this will thread on like a normal bolt, righty-tighty, onto your inner tie rod end. This one is lefty-loosey, but lefty-tighty. So you would actually, it's reverse thread, so you have to turn it to the left to get it to thread in. And as far as how far do you thread it in, well, I took my lock nut and I put it all the way at the base, like that. And then I find out how far I can go with my outer one. Now, the inner one has more adjustment. What I'm gonna do is take this lock nut and make it the same distance on both sides. I'm basically gonna turn this until they meet. And I got the same distance, if that makes any sense. So when they're the same, then I'm going to thread this into here, and then I'll thread this on to there as an assembly. So now I've got all that threaded together, and they're both against the lock nuts, all the way completely threaded in. What I'd like to do now is hold this end while unscrewing this, which is 22 millimeters. You can see the flat spots here. It's a 22 millimeter wrench, or you can just use your hand at this stage because it's not put together. It's real easy and nice and glidey to move. And I'm going to basically lengthen this until this gets really close to these down here. And this is where our tie rod ends are going to bolt to. These 2 holes I'm going to get into in just a minute. The underside of this knuckle is tapered, and one of the pieces they provide you also has a taper on it. That taper matches the hole, either one, inside of the steering knuckle. Your tie rod end is actually going to go below here. And the reason why it's going to go below there is because you can see the way the suspension's set up. It's kind of all at full droop. And the theory is when all of the weight is on the suspension and everything is sitting on the ground and the suspension's fully settled, that everything is more in an even plane. And that gives you the best possible handling. We'll get to that later on when the car is ready to set up. I'll go over all that, but at the moment, I want to get my tie rod ends bolted to my knuckles. So I have to make sure this goes in the hole I want. Now for me, I'm going to put it on the inner one. That's going to give me a slightly faster steering, and it's also going to be a little harder to steer, so I have to keep that in mind. Out here I'll have more leverage, so it'll be easier to steer, but the steering will be slightly slower than if I were to put it here, meaning I won't have to turn the wheel as much with it here than I would here to get the same effect. So
Make of that what you will, depends on the size tire you're running. You know, if you run a really wide tire and it's hard to steer, you put it out here, it'll be easier to steer for you. So these have to go through these boots, and this collar has to land on the inside of that. There's metal, the inside of that end. And I'm going to use a seal pick to get this sitting down in there, and I'm going to pull the boot away and get it to seat fully against the metal before I go on to the next step. And that'll include this piece too, because this piece also has to go in and seat against the metal rod end. Some of you didn't go and opt for the boots, that's fine. I wanted the boots, and I'm also going to show the struggle that you go through when you have these boots. You've probably already seen that in the previous video, but this is just what you have to do. All right, after quite a bit of faffing about with this, I actually wound up using a flathead screwdriver to get that boot around that collar. That other end is going into the tie rod end, and then that other tiny little collar piece will sit under this boot like so. And the bolt that holds this all together is going to be this Allen head. It's a 10mm Allen head. It's going to come up through the bottom, hold this taper into whichever hole you select for your steering, and then this is a 19mm nut that's going to cap everything off right up top here. So I'm going to go ahead and put you guys on a stand and get this installed. All right, there we are. All tie rod end installed. I got the lock nuts still backed all the way off, but they're pretty much centered. And the boots, this boot did not survive. I've got to replace this one. These boots make it infinitely more difficult to put together than without them. So I tore this one all up. The passenger side, I'll be a little wiser on, and I won't have to order 2 of them most likely. But now that that's all together, I got mine in the quick steering hole, and I'm going to take these lock nuts and just kind of move them down into position. And as far as the actual toe setup, and toe in and toe out, it's close enough right now to sit on 4 tires where I'm not worried about it. When it comes time to do the actual alignment, then I will worry more, of course, on exact setup. But for the time being, wheels pointing straight ahead, it's good enough. I'll just put these in by hand, don't have to lock them down. On to the other side, and then after I do that, I'm going to show you guys next, which is going to be installing the front sway bar kit, also from Techno Toy Tuning. And that'll wrap up the front suspension installation video. Just over here about to put the passenger side together, and I notice that that collar makes more sense in this setup and arrangement than the other side. I think I may have this smaller collar upside down on the other side, because that is supposed to essentially squeeze between these 2 collars, and that bottom piece doesn't go into the inside diameter of the tie rod end like this top piece does. This is just too thicker. There's too much thickness to it. So I'm going to put this side together this way, and then I'll undo the other side when I replace the boot and do it the right way. Also, which may help is I'm going to take these sleeves and I'm going to put them in on through the tie rod boot with it off the car for better maneuverability before I assemble it. Yeah, that worked way better. So I do have the other side upside down. This method works way better. Just hold it in your hand, work the boot around it. I didn't use seal pick this time. I used a small flathead screwdriver and pulled the boot out and rolled the screwdriver as I worked it around. And I mean, it's solid. This boot's good to go. So I'll correct the driver's side later off camera, but right now I recommend you guys go this route because it works a lot better and it's a lot easier. And now I'm going to go ahead and assemble the tie rod end on this side, which is the exact rinse and repeat of the other side. All right, much better, much easier, much better, much better. Okay, so finally, if you are adjusting these are 22 millimeters. These lock nuts on the inside are 22 millimeters, and the outside lock nut was in millimeters as well, but it was between 1 1/16 and 1 1/8. 1 1/16 was not big enough to go over it. 1 1/8 was just a little too loose. So I don't have any huge metric wrenches, so I used an adjustable wrench. Works just fine. You only need to snug them. You don't need to go locking them down. So, all right. That is the front suspension and steering done. Now it's time to move on to the final piece of the puzzle. And that is going to be the Techno Toy Tuning front sway bar kit. I'm going to go over everything right now, and we're going to get it installed into the car. The sway bar kit came with new adjustable end links that will attach to the sway bar and the lower control arms. And it came, I got these new caps, aluminum caps here, and the hardware for the sway bar clamps, which are these. And then these pieces are factory and original to the car, and will go like that, and they will rest right up here into the mounting area. Now on my particular car, I had these reinforcement plates welded in when I had my car at the body shop, so that when you put larger sway bars in it and it's under heavy twisting forces, that it won't crack or deform the original metal. It's like an extra bracing. Something I noticed is that the provided hardware for the clamp kit comes with flat washers that don't necessarily work. They don't fit down into that hole. That's a little bit of an oversight. I could get smaller flat washers, or I could take these over to the bench grinder and make them work. But if I do that, then I'll be also grinding off some of the coating and they could potentially rust. The Allen heads themselves, they're 6 millimeter, and they will go right up into that body of the car. These are stainless steel bolts, and the body is just mild steel. So I will be putting just wheel bearing grease on here just to make sure these go in nice, and I will be omitting the ill-fitting flat washers. So first steps first, take the clamp part that actually holds it up into the car. We're going to pop this out, and we're going to use a judicious amount of suspension bushing silicone paste. It's very sticky, very thick, clear and gooey, just like you saw me use on the back. It's
going to be the same exact thing up front. And we're going to put it around the sway bar. And then we're going to take the sway bar up underneath the car, and using these and the hardware, mount the front of it first, there, with the sway bar hanging over the top of the control arm. And then from there, once we get the sway bar mounted to the car, we'll get the sway bar end links installed, and then that'll complete the Techno Toy Tuning suspension system in my car. I'm going to use my floor jack to just kind of hold the sway bar up and kind of near the place it needs to be, so that I can slather on the bushing grease, silicone paste, and get everything ready to go and get bolted up to there. And I've got my bolts already lightly coated with wheel bearing grease. And if I haven't already mentioned this, these pieces are original to the car. And their purpose is to go right here. And they went on the back side of here to provide a backing and a little extra support to the bushing, the original bushing. I am going to put them back in the car, even though I have that reinforcement plate on there. Let's get it greased up and put in. All right, I got my sway bar in, and I will clean up this extra grease right here. You can see that I was very overzealous with it, but that was quite on purpose. But I've got the clamps and everything mounted in with the correct factory backing plate here. So these bolts are nice and snug, and the sway bar moves nice and freely, under its own weight even. So next, I'm going to show you how to install the sway bar end links to link this to the lower control arm, and that will complete the suspension installation. All right, so it's finally time to tie this all together. And these pieces come assembled just like this, right out of the box. And they are adjustable because that's basically a piece of thread rod in the center. And the goal here is to get these bushings to sandwich the sway bar end and the lower control arm. So these ones will go through the lower control arm, these ones will go through the sway bar itself, or vice versa. It doesn't really matter. They're the same either way. They can be installed either way. But the important thing is that once they're in, that you don't over tighten these, and that you have them adjusted to where they're not really under any kind of tension, one side or the other. So I'm going to put you back on the stand, and I'll start taking these apart and getting everything in place, and then I'll put it in, I'll screw it down, screw it together, and we'll be done. One last thing as a tip, the sway bar end is a lot thicker than the steel part of the lower control arm. And these thread rods aren't very long, so you may want to, because this would be a little bit easier on you, get the bottom one through and started, just like that. Just get it just barely started, and then turn these down and get the most thread rod up towards the top to help you get the top nut on this, so that way you struggle less. And you're going to have to move the sway bar up and down around this thread rod as you're installing it, so keep that in mind too. If you do one side and lock it down, you won't be able to move this up and down to be able to get it started. So you may have to do this into the lower control arm first on both sides,
Then take your upper part here, your sway bar, put it down over the thread rod on both sides, and then work on getting your top nut and bushing on. So that should be a decent strategy to get everything to go together as easily as possible. And there we go. After screwing around long enough with this, you can see all of this is 14mm hardware. So I have 14mm sockets and 14mm wrenches to assist with this, but the jam nuts and everything are in place. And you should have just that nylon of that lock nut. The thread rod should be just proud of the nylon on the lock nut so that you know that it's fully engaged. And there you are. These should be locked in, and same for here. Thread rod just proud of the lock nut nylon. That center sleeve is a spacer. It is currently not jiggling around. I've got the jam nuts adjusted just right. So here you are. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the driver's side, and then it'll be job done. And there you have it. Here's the driver's side, all completed. And the entire suspension has now been installed. Crossmember and all. I really wished the brakes that I wanted was available, because I would do them right now also, front and rear, and then I would have my brakes and suspension pretty much done. But unfortunately, the brakes that I want still aren't available yet. More to come on that later. I'm not going to install the crossbar and the triangulated strut tower brace bar just because it's unnecessary to do it at this point. But there was one thing that I wanted to do that I finally found and dug up. There we go. The factory black plastic caps fit right back in there. Despite having adjustable shocks. Voila. And there you have it. All done. So the next time this car will be on jack stands and I've got the wheels off, I am going to be installing the brakes. And my goal is to get the brakes on, get the master cylinder, pedal box, and so forth all in there, and the steering column hooked up so that the car can be a roller with brakes. Because when I get to that point and I get my glass and windows in except for the windshield, then the car will go to the next step, and that's having a headliner installed. And then I'll really be doubling down on the interior and wiring after that. So that's my plans going forward. As of this recording, I'm at 630 subscribers. That's pretty awesome. I've had this channel out for just over 3 years now. It was 3 years in April, and here it is in June. But if you think about it, I don't think I know 630 people. So obviously there are people watching out there that are very interested in how this car is coming together.
And for that, I really thank you for watching my videos, and I appreciate everything you've been doing as far as liking and subscribing and so forth. I don't really push that kind of stuff because I believe if you like what you see, you're going to watch it. If you don't like what you see, you're not going to watch it. So do what makes you happy. But I really appreciate those who go the extra mile for me. That means a lot. In my next video, I hope to be putting this door back together the rest of the way for real, because I've already gotten some recordings of this where I've gotten so far with it, but I'm not going to use a lot of it. I wasn't really pleased with how it was turning out. So I'm going to use some of it that's important, and then the rest of it, pretty much just going to re-record some of it. So that's just how it goes sometimes. Anyway, I really appreciate you all for watching, and I thank you all for sticking with me. And I've realized that there are some of you who are watching in other countries, like Australia, and possibly even England. I just want you to know I appreciate you guys watching. It's really cool feeling to have people that far away watch my videos and actually appreciate and want to see how this turns out. So I'll leave you with that. We'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.